Welcome to part 3 of the monster Paladarium build. So in this episode we're going to be doing a lot of planting on this backboard and transforming it, and then there's 2 cool projects which have spawned from this which I want to show everybody. So stick around for the video and find out exactly how we get on. Right, so as you can see, this has really started to gain some traction now and start looking really cool. So I've jumped the gun a bit and started planting the backboard. So what I'm doing is I'm watering these plants and misting them quite heavily throughout the day. And then I've got a lighting system on them as well, just to keep them alive. But I want to try and get these plants to start growing in and taking hold just before the tank gets here. Just so when I do get the tank, I can get this waterfall built and start doing all the tankscaping and get this up and running as soon as possible. Right, so I've been out and bought some new plants today, but let me talk to you a little bit about some of the plants that I've already got in here before we start looking at these ones. So in the bottom, I've gone for the peace lily. So really good plant. You can grow these straight from aquariums, so they do well with waterlogged roots. The Boston fern is another one. Looks really natural, foresty, jungle-like. Again, does well in wet environments. Really tough, hardy plant too. And then I've also gone for a mosaic plant as well. A little bit more difficult to take care of. However, still do really well in terrariums. Now, the problem with this Paladarium, what I might have is humidity, because this is going to be an open Paladarium. It's not going to have glass doors on it where it's going to hold the humidity inside the box. However, with this being a fish room and me having a tank, a massive African cichlid tank, which is open top as well, the humidity in this room usually sits around 70-75 anyway. So I think not having the doors on this isn't going to be an issue. I still think the room's going to be a nice humidity level for these plants without me having to box everything in. Now, I've got all these plants from B&Q. Now, if you're looking for terrarium Paladarium plants, get yourself in there because they're actually really cheap and they've got some really good offers on it as well. So I've got 3 for $15 on these pots. This one's a Devil's Ivy, so a pothos, which will do really well up at the top and in the canopy. We can plant it with some orchid bark or some leca, just to make sure that the roots aren't getting waterlogged and it's got a nice bit of aeration. So I've got 2 of those. And what these do is they're trailing plants. So they will grow all up the branches. They'll trail along the back walls like ivy does. So it'll be really good for filling in real estate on the build and taking some of these branches up as well. I've got another little miniature Boston fern. So this one's a little bit tidier than the other 2 that I got. These are a little bit beat up when I bought them from the shop, but I think they'll recover okay in here. So a little miniature Boston fern and then a spider plant. So again, you can grow these as straight out of your aquarium. They do really well in wet, waterlogged soil. But again, a really hardy plant, really easy to grow. You can stick these on your window and they'll flourish. So I'm going to get this somewhere in the build as well. The idea is I don't want to get plants that are too difficult and too delicate. So I'm trying to get some stuff that's hardy, which will, you know, bush out, grow fast, that'll fill all this space in, but at the same time still make it look like a jungle. So we'll start by getting some of these plants out of the pots. And then what I'm going to do is it's important to get as much of the soil off from the original potting as you can. But I'm going to save that soil in this tray, and I'll show you exactly what I'm going to use that for after. You got to be as careful as you can with these roots. So what I do is I give them a little bit of a roll like that, just to loosen everything up, and then just let it sort of fall apart by itself, mitigating the damage you're doing to the roots that are already there. And sometimes when you first do this and then plant them, you know, the plants can get a little bit upset and you might see the leaves wilt or a bit of yellowing in the plants, but they soon recover from it once they acclimatise to the new environment. But pothos are usually quite, you know, they're pretty solid, so you don't have to worry too much about them. What I'm trying to do is break these pots down so that, you know, I can get a few different plants out of them and spread them out in different areas. Now with Pothos, I'm going to use the orchid mix, just because it doesn't particularly like sort of waterlogged hard soil. It does quite well in this orchid bark, I've found anyway. So we'll get a little bit in there just to build a base layer. You want to use the orchid bark with plants that need a bit more oxygen to the roots, a little bit more air, because it drains quite quickly, but it holds some moisture in as well at the same time. So what I've done with that is I've used these little stainless steel pins to pin some of these branches of the devil's ivy to the backboard. So essentially what I'm trying to do is direct their road of growth where I want it to be, so that it starts trailing in those areas on the backboard and taking up some real estate. So it looks a little bit contorted at the moment, but once the plant settles in and starts growing and turning towards the light, then it should start to look like a decent bush of devil's ivy. Right, so that's some of the planting done. We've still got more plants to buy. So I'm quite happy with how that looks. The only thing I'm not too keen on is this spider plant. It's just not doing it for me. I might get some more of these Boston ferns, just because I think they look a little bit more natural, like the way they grow out. And I might pull that out and replace that with a Boston fern, but I'll leave it in there for now and see how it gets on, see how it roots in and see if it grows in any better. But all the soil we've taken off these pots, I've put into this tray here. So let me show you what this new project is, what I'm going to take on. Right, so if you've watched the last two parts of the Paladarium build, you'll know there's a big plan on this to get some live moss all over the back of this wall. That's going to take a lot of moss. So what I'm going to do is try to cultivate my own moss in this tray. So I'm going to add, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this Christmas moss. So this is one of my favourite mosses to grow. It's quite hardy underwater, but I've never grown it externally outside of water. So obviously when you grow aquatic moss externally, it does look a little bit different, but this has a really fern-like look to it when it grows in. So it's really good at creating that jungle feel on things. So that's what I'm going to use on this. I'm going to get some aqua soil into this to make sure this has got a little bit of nutrients. And then I'm going to get these little pots, I'm going to rip them up into little pieces, just dot them around here, get this lid on it, stick it under this light, and then hopefully by the time the tank actually arrives and I can really start getting this build moving, I should have a nice carpet of moss inside this box, which I can just start adding onto the background. So first thing I'm going to do is add some of this Tropica substrate on. So this should have enough nutrients in it to really help the moss take off. So we'll give that a stir in, get it all nice and mixed up. And this should be a nice, nutrient-rich surface for this moss to grow on. So I'm going to pat it down so it's nice and flat, so that when I do come to wanting to peel this off, I'm hoping it's going to be quite easy to do so. Then I'm going to take my spray bottle and I'm going to add some of this premium nutrition from Tropica into this, which is very nutrient dense, and I'm going to use that to mist this soil, get it nice and soggy, and then I'm going to plant my moss on it. Right, that's looking nice and saturated now, so we'll start getting this Christmas moss on. So I'm just going to get it on in just the most tiny little bits, push it in to that soil. Now, I've never done anything like this before. I've never tried to cultivate moss. I've never watched anyone else try and do it. So this isn't a how-to guide. This is just something that I'm trying. And then hoping for the best. So don't go out and try and do this off the back of watching me do it, because this is a complete experiment for me. Obviously, if it turns out well, and you see the end result in a few weeks and it looks really good, then yeah, go out and do it. But this is just an idea. This is just sprung to mind to try and see if I can get more bang for my buck out of this moss, because they're expensive in these pots. And there you go, I've tried to spread it as evenly as I can. What we'll do now is we can put this lid on it. And then shut them air gaps. And hope what that'll do is that'll hold the moisture inside this box. Keep the moss nice and humid and moist. And then hopefully we should see this start growing into a carpet in here. If it does, I'm going to do this with moss every time I get it. But that isn't all we're going to do. So this is another project that I'm going to start, quite similar to this one, only this is with aquatic carpeting plants. Now, I've had these seeds for a while. I ordered them a long time ago for a shrimp tank that I was going to try and dry grow them and then add the water after. But I think I'm going to use carpeting plants on this actual tank build anyway. So we'll try and propagate these the similar way. So we'll use aqua soil at first. So we'll get this nutrient rich substrate in on the bottom. Just spread that around. And then we'll use this fluval stratum to cover the rest of it. And I'll just fill up my bottle again. And then we'll start adding these seeds in. And then we'll get the lid on and leave them on the top here as well under this light. And then fingers crossed, I don't know what this is. I've completely forgot. So fingers crossed it's a decent little carpeting plant that we can put onto into the planted system when the tank gets here. So we've got our plants in. We've got our aquatic carpeting plants propagating, and then we've got some moss starting to propagate as well. So we'll come back in 2 weeks' time and have a look and see how these two projects got on and how the plants are getting on.